Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blindsided, the first and only three-card blind podcast. Welcome to our inaugural episode about Eumidian Hatchery. So, uh, let's introduce our hosts. I am Wrendle. I have been playing three-card blind for 11 months. August will be my 1 year. And I enjoy calcing and gauntleting and psyops within three-card blind.
I'm Quag. I've been going for a little more than a year, and I like making spreadsheets for everything.
Hey, I'm Army Game Lover. I just go by Army. I started Three Card Blind in January. That was my first month I submitted. I had learned about it sometime in December, but missed the submission period. I just say things and hope they are amusing. That's my job.
Thank you. And then we have a special guest today, Loop 102, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ploop. I joined in October, and you can't make me do the math to figure out how long ago that was. I do an extremely normal amount of gauntleting and guring, and no one can convince me otherwise.
In October, that's like 2 decades ago.
So true. Anyway, um, I figure since this is our first episode, it might be good to briefly explain three card blind in case this podcast finds its way into a more mainstream audience. So, three card blind is a Magic the Gathering format that is more similar to a logic puzzle than a traditional game of Magic. You submit a deck with three cards, and instead of playing out the game is simulated with the assumption that both players have perfect information, all randomness goes poorly for its controller, and you try and see if there is a line of play where one person could guaranteed win no matter what the other person does. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance within that, which is why we have such a large community. If you're interested in three card blind and are not already part of the community, you can visit 3cardblind.com, MTG 3cardblind on YouTube. Either of those will get you to the Discord where most of the discussion happens, and those will all be linked in the description.
A thing to note is that for anyone like on the fence about joining Three Card Blind, is you yourself don't actually do the calcs, unless you want to. There is a subset of people called gurus who do. So you can just throw any three cards that you think would work and just call it a month.
Yeah, it takes literally like 1 minute of commitment at the low end if you want. And at the high end, however much you want to put into it. So yeah. So Quag, you want to lead us into our topic for this episode?
Yeah, so the not necessarily the reason we started doing a podcast, but as a kind of a great opening point, we had a really impactful card printed in the Edge of Eternities commander set that was so crazy. We've had discussions on if we should pre-ban it from the format or there's a lot of opinions on this card, but I'll read it out for everyone first. It's Eumidian Hatchery. It's a land with tap, pay 1 life, add a black mana, put a hatchling counter on this land, and when this land is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, for each hatchling counter on it, create a 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. And I feel like for a lot of people, if you don't know a lot about this format, it kind of seems like an inconspicuous card. It does making a 1/1 with flying sounds really minor, but this card actually enables a ton of strategies that are kind of centralizing in how fast they can interact with you. And it's almost we've had cards that are really strong legal in the format for a while that just haven't quite been able to work because there wasn't a way you could pair it with the threat that actually won the game, and this card just enables several of them. The two most notable ones is this allows you to play a turn one Smallpox, which only makes 1/1/1, but if it collapses your opponent's hand, then it doesn't matter. Or you can build up a bunch of counters and have that Smallpox whenever you need it later on. And then the other really big one is the card Spectre's Shriek, which is kind of just like Thoughtseize with upside, and not only has Thoughtseize been banned for I think about 6 months now, but even some of the weaker versions of Thoughtseize like Dreams of Steel and Oil have been banned, and we've thought about some of the other weaker options. So a turn one hand attack is pretty strong, and then followed up with this threat that makes a bunch of 1/1 flyers is pretty strong. It's kind of this like one card package that all you need to do is figure out a way to sacrifice it, and there's a bunch of different cards that allow you to do that. I don't know if anyone else has kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have had on the ban list right now, we have banned a lot of one cost token generators or two cost. Some of them are, let's see, where are the one? Basri, that one cost? I think Basri
It
is one
is, yeah.
cost. Basri two cost is Ajani, Knuckle, the cattle pariah. Those get banned as one cost token generators. So the fact that there's just a zero cost token generator, it's a slight problem. You do have to run another card to be able to actually make the tokens, but the other card can have some type of upside that normally you wouldn't be able to do with one of the other token generators.
Yeah, I think a lot of the similarity in this card is actually kind of like a Chronomaton as well, which is a category of card named after kind of one of the more famous ones, where it scales up to the size it needs to be and then starts attacking rather than just forever pumping out 1/1s, but that's another big category of card that's got banned. So overall, it has a lot of overlap with two different really oppressive types of threats that have made their presence known in the format and on the ban list before.
And in addition to that, not only is it a scaling threat and a token threat, but it's also a land, which means that if you want to pair it with Glacial Chasm or Edge of Autumn, both of which are just 0 mana ways to sack a land, instead of Zern Orb, then it lets you have a very resilient threat in addition to being very threatening.
Yep, that's for sure. And I think as well, like it's a mana ability that puts the counters on it, so it's really hard to interact. Even some of the things that might stop a man land or some other token generating lands don't hold this back in the way that you might expect.
With it being a land, it's also a lot more difficult to get rid of since we have taken out a lot of the land destruction in the format and banned it because of how strong it normally is. Just being able to shut down your opponent is quite strong in this format because you only have 3 cards. Destroying a land is usually a third of their cards.
Yeah, so Hatchery there are a few problems that make it very kind of unique as far as centralizing cards go. One of which, as we've been saying, is that it's very difficult to interact with, and very crucially, a lot of different Hatchery decks need to be interacted with in different ways. It's not like you can just throw something in your deck and say, this covers all Hatchery decks, because they do play out very differently from each other. And in addition to that, many of the Hatchery decks are countered by other Hatchery decks, so it kind of evolves its own rock, paper, scissors within kind of all of the mini rock, paper, scissors that goes on in the metagame of the format.
I will say there's kind of one card that's a one-size-fits-all answer to Hatchery, and that's Leyline of the Void, but it's also a very bad card, and probably should not be getting submitted to the main event ever, so...
I think Leyline of the Void has people are experimenting with a little bit. One of the better things that I've seen people suggest is pairing it with Force of Despair as like a pitch card that's black when you want to do that, or as it's kind of at least taking advantage of the fact that when you don't need it, it's doing something for you. But it's certainly a card that has a really high variance in how much it's going to help you in a matchup, and that's always a scary submission in 3-card blind.
Yeah. And just for reference, for people that don't already know this, the reason Leyline of the Void counters Hatchery so well is that Leyline of the Void is a replacement effect, which means that Eumidian Hatchery, when it gets sacrificed, is never put into the graveyard, which means its token generating ability never happens.
Yep, but they get to use the mana, so they'll still be able to cast Pox or their discard spell to kind of collapse whatever else you're doing. So even though it stops their threats, it doesn't necessarily win you the game immediately just to have a Leyline of the Void.
Yeah. And it doesn't even, like with the Force of Despair shell, it doesn't even necessarily beat all Hatchery decks, because if you want to play like Hatchery, a way to sack it, and then a 1-drop such as Cecil Dark Knight, then that deck wins. So.
And also the Force of Despair version doesn't even beat Smallpox, it just ties it, one of the most notable variations of Hatchery.
Yeah, so there are answers to Hatchery that work very generally. Leyline of the Void is very swingy, but works against most of them. The Tabernacle at Pendule Vale is a bit less risky because it works on a lot of decks that aren't Hatchery, but at the same time, it generally only ties Hatchery decks instead of beating them like the Leyline of the Void does.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird Hatchery lines that I feel like I see people trying to beat it, and end up not realizing the thing they're submitting doesn't beat it. Hatchery with Zuran Orb can make instant speed blockers even through a Tabernacle. You have a lot of different ways that you really have to be careful with the lines of this card because it is very strong in a lot of different matchups in really unique ways.
Smallpox
Even some of
hatchery
the
also
answers
in general
for
kind of beats
non-basic
Tabernacle
lands
because
in the
they do get
format,
to keep a
such as
token because
like
the Mox
Seize
sticks
Claim,
around,
Lush
which
Growth, we've
is
been
one of the
seeing a
two
little
big
bit more
lists, and
recently
and
submitted to
some of
main
the
event.
most general
Those
hate doesn't
don't
even beat that.
actually win. Well, depending on the card you pair it with, they don't actually win if it's the Smallpox variation, simply because whoever plays their land first will usually lose.
Yep, they can play the hatchery and then sacrifice it all within one turn. So if you don't have a way to either proactively or instant speed interact with it, you might not get a chance to prevent them from making 1/1/1, and that can often be enough to win.
So it's definitely an interesting card. Definitely something that requires a lot of care, both in playing it and playing against it. And this card is so powerful and so centralizing, in fact, that there was a lot of discussion after it was spoiled about potentially re-banning it, which is something that we have never done, but was something that people were potentially interested in for Eumidian Hatchery, just because it is kind of on another level as far as cards that we've seen since the release of Modern Horizons 3.
Yeah, I think the only comparable situation we've had of a card being so strong that a pre-ban might have been warranted was Disruptor Flute from Modern Horizons 3, which was a extremely centralizing card for the 1 month it was in the meta before we banned it, and is probably the card that has been like most above the power level of the format when it was added to the format, I think, before Hatchery. I think Hatchery has a good argument it's maybe even a bigger difference. But we did not pre-ban that one. We didn't even really entertain discussions of pre-banning that one, but I do think that one slipped through the cracks a little bit more, where people didn't quite realize how good it was until very close to the submission time, where bringing up concerns about its strength was you didn't want to risk like outing that you might be considering submitting it. So I think Hatchery being a much earlier release allowed people to immediately identify its strengths, and it's a little more obvious how strong this card is, I think, at least for the more enfranchised players, that you can play it as these like really strong turn one plays.
The other thing is that I wasn't here for Disruptor Flute Meta, but from what I've heard, information is generally a lot more public nowadays. So, like, Hatchery was spoiled, and immediately people were talking about the best decks, where in previous months, people might not immediately talk about what they thought the best decks were in case they wanted to submit them themselves.
Yep. So I think that's kind of why, beyond just kind of if we should pre-ban or not pre-ban this card, we have not really had a situation where something has been so strong that like pre-banning was something even really on the table. So that is probably the first reason why we didn't want to pre-ban it, is we haven't done it yet. It's kind of a big deal to do a pre-ban, and the nature of our format is we certainly 1 month of a very strong card, it's easy to then remove it for the next month if we don't want it. So that is probably the biggest reason we didn't pre-ban it, is we don't want to kind of open the can of worms of possibly having to pre-ban cards when we can just allow the normal mechanisms to take care of them. I certainly don't think it's the only one. I think there are some concerns beyond just like, can the format handle a really strong card? I've seen some pushback on a pre-ban of this card, you can beat it with certain strategies. And I don't think that people complaining that we should pre-ban this card felt that it was truly unbeatable. I think some of the concern is more that it is so centralizing that it turns the meta into a very like rock, paper, scissors situation where you're playing Hatchery or the deck that beats Hatchery or the deck that beats that deck but then loses to Hatchery, and it's a little bit more luck based. Now I don't think we're quite going to get into something so straightforward as that, but that is probably the bigger concern of what Hatchery might do to the meta, more than it's just literally an unbeatable threat in the meta that we have no tools to deal with. Like something, if I don't know, I really don't think any card could be added to the meta that would be like so unbeatable that you literally couldn't beat it. But it's more about the like impact on that meta.
I mean, Thoracle, but you know.
There are ways to beat Thoracle.
I was thinking about a 3-cost 2/3 with like Death Touch. It might have some kind of recursion or something.
Nah, it seems bad.
Seems pretty stoppable.
I definitely agree with you that the issue with Hatchery is not necessarily that it is powerful, but just that it kind of focuses everything around itself in a way that some players find very uninteresting. And it also kind of disrupts the kind of linear progression of the meta. Like if you play for many months in a row, as we have, then you kind of get a sense of the meta every month. You add a few cards, you ban a few cards. It's a very like smooth progression. And then when you drop in a new broken card like Hatchery, it just completely upends everything for that 1 month.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's actually more comparable to some really notable unbans. Like we had Wasteland unbanned in, I think, October maybe.
Yeah, it was October.
And we had both Jace and Chancellor of the Annex unbanned in, I believe, April 2024. And both of those immediately centralized the entire meta around them. And some people liked them, some people really didn't like them. But there was at least kind of an intentionality with the unbanning people deciding that they wanted to put this in the format. And I think Hatchery, kind of the us having no control over that, is certainly a little bit less pleasant of an experience for some people on that. And I think that, especially compared to Wasteland, I think this card is going to be way more centralizing and way more limiting in the ways you can actually beat a card like this. Wasteland give you a lot of tools of ways you could kind of ignore the effect of Wasteland. So I think this is certainly going to be more impactful than that. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if there's a lot of other reasons that we kind of finally settled on the not pre-banning it. I guess we didn't necessarily decide that. It was ultimately the decision of the Mr. Blind in charge of the format for choosing to not ban it, but I think many of us weighed in on if we thought it was pre-ban worthy. But yeah, I think the kind of ultimate conclusion is sometimes it's fun to have a broken meta, and even if some people don't like it, some people do like it, so we can all experience the variety of different metas that can be produced by a card, even one as strong and centralizing as Humidity and Hatchery.
Yeah, and if you want to hear Mr. Blind's full reasoning on it, he has a very in-depth video on the channel that is, again, going to be linked below.
For me, one of the most compelling things that Mr. Blind said was that really, if we start pre-banning stuff, it really puts it puts it on us to have to worry about it every single time a strong card is released. And I do think that that's a very good point, because I don't think the player should be responsible for pre-balancing the format without any results. So I think that is one of the best points that we haven't brought up
it's certainly
yet.
We can make predictions about what we think the meta is, but on some level the meta is what the meta is, and if nobody submits Hatchery next month, then I think it would be a hard argument that it was good enough to ban. Now, I think that's very unlikely it's going to go down that way, but
I mean, I would still clamor to ban it in that case.
I think we might all want that, but certainly I think that it would be a hard argument to make that if it is putting up no results and no one is submitting it, is it really a problem, or is it just something we've seen? Because we've certainly seen people very worried about cards. Notably, we had Shaz's Chocobo in Final Fantasy. We had Unwanted Remake in Duskmourn, and both of those were cards people thought were going to be really, really impactful cards that got banned quickly, and neither really has been that impactful to the meta. They're playable, but they're not crazy cards. So sometimes we do overestimate how strong something's going to be. I think Hatchery is so strong that it's hard to not think that we have at least, even if we are overestimating, it's still going to be pretty impactful. But yeah, it's certainly, we can't always know exactly what the meta is going to do.
I can't think of any other cards from Duskborn that people really wanted to ban despite not being very impactful. No other examples.
It was impactful, though, for all the Exemplar players who had to play against it every month.
It did a number on shit posting channels.
All right, are we ready to wrap up on Humidity and Hatchery and maybe move on to some other Edge of Eternities cards? Or does anyone have more words they want to say on it?
Going back to Ploop having talked about like information being a lot more public, I don't know the specifics, but with all the hype surrounding Humidity and Hatchery and everyone sharing all the different decks, it definitely played into a rule change that happened recently in the 3-card blind server. It didn't do it itself, of course, but there was a rule change recently where you cannot share your exact percentages of gauntlets or just make your gauntlet public at all. And I think all the Humidity and Hatchery hype probably caused that to just go over the top.
Yeah, I think it's maybe not entirely a rule change in the sense that we kind of had a rule that was really loose on what was allowed and not, and it was not being like fully enforced. So it's kind of a clarifying of some of the rules as we kind of had a building on that. But yeah, I think Humidity and Hatchery, there was so much discussion about it that kind of really caused us to reflect on how much information we want shared in advance of the main event.
And on a completely unrelated note, I kind of want to talk about why I personally was one of the most vocal people in favor of not pre-banning Hatchery, which is I think that personally it's just going to be a lot of fun, because I normally am not a player who techs. If you look at my submission history, it's just a bunch of decks people knew about, and I decided to submit for that month. And I feel like this month I have a lot more space to tech in. That is not to say I will submit tech, because I have no clue what I'm submitting, but I feel like there's just a lot more options in this month. Not because like board decks will be viable, but because less known decks will be viable, and it gives the brewers a lot more space to work in.
That's definitely true. I think Wasteland meta was probably the most clear example of this, where it gave a very clear like boogeyman for the format that then allowed people to make choices that were prepared to deal with it. So I think that is kind of a really centralized meta often allows more brewing in some ways. The question is hatchery so strong that it's going to be kind of limiting in like what is even possible to brew? And we certainly will see that in the upcoming month of are any brews really successful? And I think we'll see some successful ones, but exactly how successful they will be and like how much hatchery is just so much of a safer choice is definitely up for not really debate, but I guess up for us to find out.
We'll also probably see some new cards that haven't been submitted, such as like Illness in the Ranks, which is a card that technically counters
Yeah.
Hatchery, and probably will be submitted for once.
Yeah, I mean, people love submitting things that do it, and I would say my most unique submission was probably in the Wasteland month. I think I was one of the first people to submit Duskrow's Reliquary as a card you can play with an indestructible land to get around Wasteland. So yeah, I'm definitely pro centralized metas producing interesting and unique answers to them.
That's funny. My most unique deck is also Duskrow's Reliquary, and that's just because I was feeling quirky in my second month of the Surfer and decided to submit a bad deck for once.
My most quirky deck is we don't talk about it. And not go.
Your most quirky deck is every month.
No, they're normally pretty normal, but except for the one month where it was Bloom, Gideon, Leyline of Combustion. We don't talk about that month.
You cannot say that you're submitting Mental Misstep Treetop Village Sunken Citadel for like 4 months in a row and it's not unique. Like
It was the only time it was ever submitted, so I guess
Yeah. Hey, I also submitted a unique deck this past month.
True.
I have no idea how nobody submitted Idle Tabby before that, but it's technically a new deck. Anyway, do we want to talk about new cards?
All right. Well, yeah, speaking of cards that have never been submitted to the main event, we can move on to. I think I have a selection of, let's see, maybe 10 cards that I think are worth talking about. So I would say the number one card that I think is most likely to be impactful to the 3-card blind meta, at least moving forward, I think it's actually really bad into Hatchery, is Lightstall Inquisitor. Which is a 2/1 with Vigilance, that when it enters, each opponent exiles a card from their hand and may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Each spell cast this way costs 1 more to cast, and each land played this way enters tapped. And it costs a single white mana. I don't know if I said that. So this kind of resembles some strong disruptive cards that we've seen. We have Mesmeric Fiend as a card that is maybe getting banned that is a stronger version of this, but at 2 mana. So it's kind of resembles things. It's not quite as easy to use. It is untargeted discard that is much easier for them to get around if they exile their land, but with some interesting pairings like Crack the Earth or Raise, you can certainly make them exile their land and then destroy their land before they get to have it untapped. So it's a unique card for sure. I think it will not be the strongest card in the meta overall, but I think it's probably the card with the most promise I've seen from Edge of Eternities.
Yeah. I'm actually a big fan of it.
Everyone's been talking about it with Razor Crack the Earth, but honestly, I think it's better with Seize Claim because somehow it doesn't beat depletion decks despite being land destruction with Razor Crack the Earth because you have to sacrifice your own land and Doka to play the Inquisitor first if depletion is on the play. So I think solely for that reason, Seize Claim is probably better.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a meta call. You beat different things with Seize Claim versus with a true land destruction spell.
Yeah, there's actually one other piece of land interaction that I really like with Lightstall Inquisitor, which is, well, let's go backwards. So the problem with Lightstall Inquisitor is they hold their land in hand and then they get rid of that instead of getting rid of one of their actual cards because they can still play the land. But there does happen to be a piece of 1-mana interaction that punishes the opponents for not playing their lands, which is Encroach.
That is true. It's kind of weird. I would say all the different ways you can interact with it have upsides and downsides. They all kind of do a little bit of combo and a little bit of nombo, where it is good with Encroach if you catch it, but also if you're using this to get the land, you almost like Encroach is stepping on its toes a little bit, I feel like. So there's certainly, I think all 3 of those are testable options for like what pairing might be good to go with something like this. So I think we'll certainly see moving forward what could be the right pairing for this. Is kind of a techie option that I think will be okay, but will never quite. I mean, you never know where the meta's gonna go, but I don't think it's likely to be like a card that gets banned very quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, moving on. I think that the second most impactful card. This is kind of my light personal ranking, but I think they're not super clear, is probably Temporal Intervention, which is a 3 mana, 2 and a black sorcery that is target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, that player discards that card, but it has Void, where it costs 2 less to cast if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or if a spell was warped this turn. I don't think you can really get that the warping version of it useful, but notably you can cast this off a Lotus Petal, and it is just a Thoughtseize with no downsides if you cast it off a Lotus Petal. So there's been a bit of, well, I guess.
Well, the downside is that you have to play it off Lotus Petal, which means your threat is Memnite or Dryad Arbor.
Exactly. But the actual spell itself doesn't have any downsides the way that some of the other Thoughtseize replacements like Inquisition of Kozilek or Divest, or I guess those are probably the two big ones, where those miss certain cards. This will hit every non-land card. But it's certainly very weak to be playing just a 1/1 as the only possible pairing that really goes with this. Or at least nicely.
Like, especially when you can just, if you're really desperate for a slightly better Thoughtseize, you can just play like Mutavault, Moxjet, Spectre Shriek, or, this month play Hatchery, but there do already exist, like, stronger versions of this effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a chance that Spectre Shriek is a card we look at some point as a very strong alternative, so this could be a replacement. This does have the one advantage over Spectre Shriek of having slightly better sequencing for cards like against foil or something. This with a Memnite actually beats foil, or I guess ties foil, but you can actually discard their interaction before you have to play your creature, while Spectre Shriek, there's a little bit of a timing problem with some things that if you don't want to lead your thing in advance of playing it, you have that sequencing that is a little bit better with this card. But I think the downsides of having to play it off of only getting a 1/1 instead of a 2/2 with Mutavault definitely makes it, I would say, worse. I think a lot of the cards in Edge of Eternities that aren't Hatchery are not great, so that's why I'm not super excited about these, but I just wanted to look at all the cards that I think are even worth looking at, really, in the meta. So that's why I think this is at least a card that I could see seeing play after some other things better than it get banned.
I think what's more likely to happen is Temporal Intervention is a card to keep your eye on for new cards getting printed that work with it, because I could very easily see if they print, like, I don't know, a 2-drop that makes a black when it enters, then that immediately is a way better thing to do with this, because you can play, like, Utility Land, or, no, I'm just lying.
Yeah, there certainly are cards that could enable this.
Yeah, I do think this is, like, not good now. Keep an eye on it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's kind of what I would say on this one. Any other thoughts on that one before I move on? All right, next I have Hardlight Containment, a single white mana. It's an aura that enchants an artifact you control, and it exiles target creature an opponent controls until this aura leaves the battlefield, and it gives the artifact it is enchanting Ward 1. So this is very similar to a few other cards that don't really see play very much right now, so I'm not, again, super high on this card, but it's similar to On Thin Ice, which is kind of the same effect, but it enchants a snow land, so you would only be able to play with another white threat. And you could also, there's Chain to the Rocks, which you have to play a mountain and white mana source, and it enchants a mountain. So it's kind of like a Path Swords alternative, because those are banned for being very strong. Exiling an opponent's creature is always a great effect, but being a temporary effect is a big downside on this. I would say the only reason that I really see this having a little bit of upside on some of the other options would be if you are able to play a creature that is an artifact. So you have the option to use it as protection on your creature when you need it, or you can use it as removal on your artifact land. Now, I think it's going to be challenging to have that line up well, but I certainly think that is kind of where you might want to keep your eye on this card as a slight upside on those other two options. But enchanting an artifact is probably worse than being able to enchant a basic snowland in general, for how easy it is for your opponent to then remove this. But that Ward 1 is certainly a nice bonus if you can actually make it line up well.
Also, are we just completely ignoring the 2-color tap snow duels? Very important 3-card blind cards.
They do have.
Certainly, I guess,
they do have
yeah.
their own types.
They do.
They do.
When I look at this card, my brain just thinks, like, why am I not playing Duskfar's Reliquary? Because that's also removal, exile-based removal that pairs well with an artifact land, and I think is just significantly better than this. But you know.
Yeah, I think you have to make the Ward 1 useful in some matchups to make this better than the alternatives. And I'm not sure if there's currently a way to do that, but theoretically, if there was, I think that's the only way that you would really want to consider it. But again, I think it's a card to keep your eye on as something that could exist with the right brew as something that is pretty okay removal and does something a little bit interesting. All right. I would say then the final card that I think is like, I'm not gonna say good, but that I'm like a little bit interested in before we kind of go into the like really wacky ones, is Sunset Saboteur, which is a 1 and a black creature with menace that has ward, discard a card, and whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and opponent controls. So it almost sounds like it's gonna be really exciting until it says that, and then it's a 4/1. So this is an aggressive fast clock that is evasive and hard to remove, with that ward being discard a card and menace. So it's certainly a very interesting card. Now, buffing your opponent's creature every turn is pretty terrifying. But I think in the right type of shell, this being an aggressive threat that you can pair with a utility land, because you can cast it off Mox and a utility land, or with some other things, it's certainly, I don't think, totally dead. I think it's an interesting aggressive option. All right. Well, it doesn't sound like anyone else has thoughts on this card, so yeah, maybe we can move on from that one.
It's underwhelming.
Certainly.
I don't know if this was mentioned, but it does. You can play removal spell with it, which is just like, why are you not playing Tribute to Hirobi? But you can do it.
Yeah, it's kind of in that vein, but certainly the fact that it doesn't work with smallpox kind of makes it a lot worse than those other options
Yeah.
for something like that of being an interesting pairing there.
I mean, rumor says Silex is the better Hirobi pairing anyway, though I don't know how well this works with Silex either, because you don't want to remove your own thing.
Yeah, but you don't want to remove your Hirobi, so it's, I guess, it's probably a little bit, not as much worse with Silex, but I would say yeah.
And then also Feed the Swarm continues to exist and be very mediocre.
Yeah, Feed the Swarm, we've definitely seen it do
Yeah.
okay in some side events. It's a card to be aware of, but I think there's also there's Baleful Mastery, I believe, which is a 2-mana exile spell in
Yes.
black.
Yep.
So
Oh yeah,
cards to know
I
exist.
forget that card exists.
But I guess it's technically a 4-mana
Yeah.
spell, but you can cast it for 2 mana in 3-card blind with no downside.
Feed the Swarm was good when Bitter Blossom and Leyline of Sanctity were legal, but Leyline of Singularity, but I don't think after they got banned that it was too good.
Yeah, it's always good to know they exist, but a lot of them are always bubbling kind of underneath what is quite good. Next up, I have the classic, maybe you could play this off a storage land card that everyone's always a little bit excited about, and it's Ouroboros for 2 green. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is this creature's power, and it starts as a 1/3. So this grows exponentially; it doubles its power every turn, assuming that it doesn't get interacted with. And if you somehow end up playing this with a second threat, you can also put counters on that. So it's kind of like a version of the white. I can't remember the name of the white one right now. The 1 and a white that puts a +1/+1 counter each turn on something.
I can remember it
Luminarch
normally.
Aspirant.
Yes.
Luminarch Aspirant. Yep. It's kind of like a bigger version of Luminarch Aspirant, which isn't necessarily a good thing because costing more mana is usually worse. But yeah, it's a fast threat that grows very quickly once you cast it.
I think the comparison is probably better made to what's it called? Rampaging Aetherbrood, which for reference is 4 and a green for a 4/4 with trample and ward 2, that at the beginning of your upkeep you get energy equal to its power, and then you can pay any amount of energy to put that many counters on it. So in effect, it does the same power doubling gimmick. It only does it for itself, not for your other creatures, but usually in the storage deck, that doesn't matter. So what you're really getting is, in exchange for 1 mana more, you're getting, it starts at 4 power, it has trample, it has ward 2, and the thing about Rampaging Aetherbrood is it itself is worse than Living Conundrum. So
Yeah.
I don't really see Ouroboros having too much of a niche.
The one benefit of Ouroboros being a 4-mana card is you can cast it turn 2 off a depletion and a soul land, which is not true of the 5-mana one. I still don't think it quite gets there, but it is certainly just at that small enough range where you can get it out a little bit faster than some of the other options similar to it.
Yeah. Although at that point, you can also play Crystal Vein, Undiscovered Paradise, Mossborn Hydra, which also doubles its power every turn, but also has trample.
I was
Yeah.
also thinking about Hydras with Colonian or Primordial Hydra. Primordial Hydra is X and 2 green and it enters with X +1/+1 counters. At your upkeep, you double the number of +1/+1 counters, and it does get trample as long as it has 10 or more, which is pretty similar, other than the fact that it doesn't do it to your other creatures, but you could play it for 3 even with Primordial, and we don't see that.
Yeah, I'm not sure this card is going to be great, but I was definitely one I saw some people discussing as a scaling threat. But yeah, I think there's a lot of options similar to it that don't see a lot of play. But
I think actually the best shell where it is distinct from the other threats is Lumberjack plus Taiga, because then you do actually get a second threat and you can cast it turn 2.
Yeah, that's very true.
And it's probably worse than Minskin Boo, but it's also almost definitely the best Ouroborate shell, because then you get, I think, a turn 6 Goldfish, and it gets big pretty fast.
That's true. And I think Minskin Boo, even though it's almost certainly better, is a card that is probably not that far out from being a card we might discuss banning. So if that gets banned, this is certainly a card that could fill the role of fast scaling thing you have to deal with. All right. Well, next up I have Secluded Starforge, which is a land that taps for colorless, and it taps 2 mana, tap X artifacts you control to give a creature +X/+0, which, as a sorcery, not a great effect in 3-card blind, but for 5 mana you can tap it and create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. So I think that this is just a card to keep on your radar as something that exists. 5 mana to make it 2/2 is a lot, but it's not impossible to hit. We've seen Mirex see a little bit of play, which makes 1/1s with 1/1s that can't block, I believe, with Toxic ones. So they're kind of like 2/2s when they attack. So just as a thing on a land that kind of wins over time if you have some other disruptive things, it's not not a card that is impossible to make work. It is pretty expensive, but it's an upgraded version of Mishra's Foundry, maybe? Mishra's something?
Yes.
One.
It's Foundry.
One that makes 2/2s
Urza's
for
Factory?
7 mana. Maybe Urza's Factory. One of the Urza's lands that doesn't matter because it doesn't see any play anywhere. This is still a little bit more of an aggressive version of that, but I would say that it's kind of like Mirex, but it's more expensive, but it can block. I think does Mirex cost 1 mana to make a 1/1? I don't know if it does.
I think it's 3 mana.
3.
If it was 1 mana, everyone would play
Or
it.
sorry, does it cost 1 life to make a 1/1?
It does not.
No.
Okay.
No.
And-
Fountain Port costs 1 life to make tokens. That might be what you're thinking of.
That is the one. The huge upside of Mirex, obviously, is it makes colored mana the turn it enters, which allows you to pair it with a huge number of things that this doesn't get to work with. But another land, I think, to kind of keep on your radar as something that could come up in the right shell or in the right kind of side event or something where you want this kind of effect on a land.
Yeah, my brain immediately goes to 2-color storage plus something like interaction spell, or like, what's the second to best E-Bridge?
Web of Inertia?
Yeah, Web of Inertia. That's what I was trying to think of, which is really bad, but it feels like maybe the best thing you could be doing with it, though I don't really know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's an option. I think a lot of times the Megaliths is going to be better because you're just pinging the opponent every turn, and that's probably going to be a faster clock with almost any other land it's going with. But well, I guess I didn't calc it out. It's probably close, but this is
with storage. The 2/2s are almost definitely faster because Megalith 2-color storage is like
Megalith
turn
is
60
very
Goldfish.
Yeah, I guess. You'll make 1 token, but yeah, in order to actually like accumulate enough tokens to like push through something, it might take a really long time. But often the Goldfish doesn't really matter for these things because you're playing it with something so disruptive that it doesn't matter how long it takes you to win. If you are able to resolve it, and if you don't resolve it, your deck is just not that good. So that's kind of the nature of something like this. All right, and I would say kind of the final one that I'm kind of a little bit interested in before I talk about 3 other ones that I think are something to think about, even though I'm not excited about them, is Reroute Systems, which is a protection spell, which is something that almost never is good in 3-card blind. Single white mana, it's a modal instant. One option is that target artifact or creature gains indestructible until end of turn, which is usually not a great effect because you have to wait a turn after you play your creature in order to untap to use something like this. So often you've missed your window to use this. But the other part of the modality is that it deals 2 damage to target tapped creature. So this is at least a protection spell that is not dead all of the time when it doesn't actually get to protect your creature. So if you
Yeah.
ever want a protection spell, it exists. A lot of the time, just playing 2 of the creature you want to protect is a better option. But this is something you
Yeah,
could
it's
play.
definitely a card.
Usually, I would prefer discard to just remove the removal spell from their hand before they play it.
For sure. Yeah.
This is playable in 3 years when we've banned every single card that says discard
True.
anywhere on the
Yeah.
card.
If you absolutely have to be a
Maybe.
mono white for some reason, then you can't discard.
Jam Caracas. Hello.
Yes. Yeah. If
True.
you want to play Caracas, this is a protection spell you can play off Caracas that isn't dead if you don't need the protection. But still.
Mana Tide's time.
Yep. All right, hopefully speeding through these last couple. Next up, we got Moonlit Meditation for 2 and a blue. It's an aura that enchants an artifact or creature you control. For the first time you would create 1 or more tokens each turn. You may instead create that many tokens that are copies of the enchanted permanent. I've seen some people a little bit excited about this card and trying to brew around it, and I think this card is unfortunately just a little bit too much win more, where if you're making copies of the thing, you probably would already be doing pretty well with just that thing. But it's a card that you can put on something and make a bunch of copies if that's something you're excited about. But unlike the other ones, I really don't feel like this is filling a niche that needs to be, I guess not even needs to be filled, but I don't feel like this is ever an effect that you actually really are benefiting from. Like, you could just be playing almost anything else. But I've seen a couple people talk about it. Next up, I just wanted to touch on the planet lands, because they're certainly interesting as a land that does something, but unfortunately, most of them look not great. The red one eventually turns into a 2/2 if you have another 2/2s, but yeah, planet lands are exciting in theory that it's a land that gives you an effect, but none of them are that good. And then the final card that I want to talk about is Weft Walking, which is 4 blue, an enchantment that when this enchantment enters, if you cast it, shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library and then draw 7 cards, which is almost nothing in 3-card blind. And then the first spell each player casts during each of their turns may be cast without paying its mana cost. This card is terrible, but in fact it's so terrible, it's actually a playable card in 3-card blind back build, which is where you're trying to build the worst deck possible. So I just wanted to bring it up as kind of a fun card that is so bad it sees play somewhere in 3-card blind for being absolutely terrible in this format.
And
I
before
will
we move
say
on,
the one other card.
I do want to touch on one other card, which is Seam
Yeah.
Rip, which is a
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Yeah, it's an enchantment that costs white. It says when this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. If you've played a lot of Magic and or 3-card blind, that text box may sound familiar to you because it's identical to Portable Hole, which is kind of a niche removal option. It is permanent-based interaction, which is generally worse than instant or sorcery-based, but it can hit any permanent type, but only mana value 2 or less. It has ups and downs. Seam Rip being an enchantment versus Portable Hole being an artifact is probably a very slight upside, although it probably will not matter that much, but it is just something to be aware of.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say enchantment is almost strictly better, if only just because Divest exists and will be a card.
Yep.
And I guess it does something sometimes.
Yeah, I think in other formats the difference is mattering a lot more, but yeah, I think there's not a ton of cards that are only really caring about one, but it comes up a little bit.
Yeah. No, yeah. In other formats, every deck that plays Porthole loves that it's an artifact, but here it doesn't matter, usually.
I mean, Pioneer Humans doesn't care whether it's an artifact or enchantment, but...
Well, now it can run 8 of them if it wants.
True. Actually, that's probably really good for the sideboard against the fact, like, the 40% aggro meta game. Yay, mice. My favorite package.
All right, so those are kind of all the cards that I think are something that you could think about from the new set, but like I would say overall, Hatchery is extremely centralizing and obviously something you have to think about if you're going to play in this next month, and everything else is, I would say, not something you probably need to think about much even after Hatchery has left and we're kind of back to the power level that we would expect from the format. So I'm not sure if that's kind of, we can wrap up on that. I don't know if anyone had anything more they wanted to say for this.
Sonic. They're Sonic cards now. I bet someone's going to try to
Sonic is also legal in August if anyone wants to submit those cards.
Was Sonic not
This is a call out
legal
to...
in June and July? Or at least July? I think Sonic has been out for more than a month, but I'm not sure.
Has it? I thought it came out in July.
Yeah, I thought Sonic is new. This is a call out to all Exemplar players. Everyone, we are submitting Sonic.
What if I want to submit Shadow?
I was thinking about that. I was just looking.
No, it does do things.
No,
I
Black
bet.
Lotus, Black Lotus
bet it has
Shadow
text.
seems pretty good.
Shadow's 6 mana. I thought it was 4.
I think it was 4. But he is like black, red.
Yeah,
Yeah, double depletion.
it's true. That way, if he gets bounced
Yep.
back to your hand, you can cast him again.
Sonic, you can play off depletion bounce land. Or like the sack lands, but those don't exist. The 2-color sacks. Sonic does Chrono, I will say.
Yeah, unfortunately, 3 colors of mana is a pretty rough one to cast in 3-card blind.
No.
Yeah.
Guys, Sonic is the best card in 3-card blind this month. Submit it now.
Knuckles is crazy. What the heck?
Are you guys reading these cards for the first time?
Yeah, except for I'd seen Sonic
I know
before,
what Shadow does, but...
but Knuckles, 4 cost 2
I-
4, double strike, trample, haste.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, that one I've seen people discuss for some other formats, but again, not. It almost, the effect it does is not easy to take advantage of in 3-card blind. That if you just want something like that, it's easy to find something better than it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Making tokens when it takes your whole deck to cast it in the first place, or treasure tokens when you're already using all your mana to cast it, then you don't have something to spend them on.
Hey,
Red Storage Knuckles, some card that isn't red.
if your opponent has a Platinum Angel, you'll eventually win when you have 30 treasure tokens.
That's not how Platinum Angel works.
Yeah,
Not Platinum Angel, the
prevents your
other,
opponents from
anyone that where
winning.
you can't.
Platinum
Easy game.
Empyrean.
Platinum Empyrean?
Yeah, Platinum Empyrean.
Yeah, Empyrean says life totals can't
Yep.
change, which
Yeah.
would work.
I know this.
Though it just gets blocked, but that's beyond the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who cares?
It looks like the announcement for the secret lair was June 27th, so it was unclear if these were legal in July. They might have been or they might not have been, but they were not submitted. So you could be the first to submit Dr. Eggman to the main event,
Tempting.
and no one can take that away from you.
Well, I'll take it away because
I mean,
will,
actually, someone else
yeah.
can by also
we
submitting
will
it. So
simultaneously be the first person.
But once you are the first one,
anyone who plans on skipping Exemplar this month because Hatchery, please just submit Sonic. It's much funnier.
Well, that would actually tank the reload, though.
Yeah, but like Cephalopod, submit Sonic. Do it.
Anyway, is there anything else people want to bring up? Or if not, we can wrap up this episode.
I'll say that they started previewing Spider-Man, but I don't think we should talk about those cards quite yet. They exist now, though.
That
I don't want
That's
that.
a next episode, or maybe even the one after, kind of topic.
You could just never
Yeah,
talk
those-
about it.
I'm not even sure if those cards are legal in September. They might not be legal till October. It depends on the exact date. So we might have a long time until we have to start thinking about that. That is true. But in terms of people having to think about it, if you're playing the main event, you might have 1 or 2 months even until you have to deal with Spider-Man.
Blanket Spider-Man ban.
Well,
Do
good
it,
thing there are
coward.
like 50 of them.
Like we discussed about pre-banning a set. Let's just pre-banning a card. We can just pre-ban the entire Spider-Man set.
Every single Spider-Man card has a Universes Within printing, allegedly. Though I believe Mr. Blind has announced he will only use the Universes Without version of the card. So, but if you always submit the Universes Within, maybe one will slip through the cracks. You never know. But yeah, it looks like that will not be legal until the October event. So we've got some time for that one.
Man,
But I wanted to submit Spider-Man.
you still can, you just have to wait a bit.
I guess if there's like one thing we might want to comment on, so we maybe are just starting to get what the ban vote cards might be. Does anyone think any of them are going to be relevant in the Hatchery month if they don't get banned? And I guess for anyone who doesn't know, the possible ones would be Sarcomancy, Mesmeric Fiend, Meddling Mage, Elite Spellbinder, and Maze of Ith are kind of the 5 that
Are those
might
already
get
set in
And
stone?
Heartfire Hero.
and Heartfire Hero as the bonus. I believe the video is probably coming out. Came out by the time anyone sees this podcast, and I think
Yeah,
they're pretty set in
Yeah.
stone.
This is not going to release until like it's almost August.
I think with the Hatchery meta, Encroach is going to be pretty strong. So I don't think, even if they don't get banned, I don't think Maze and Heartfire Hero are going to do that good.
Yeah, we're gonna see a lot of probably land interaction on those.
They even lose to Smallpox too. They're not going to do very good if they don't get banned. So I don't even think we need to. I don't think they're that strong anyway. I don't think we need to ban them.
Sarko. We should ban Sarko, but
Yeah, we should.
Sarko's
And I
definitely
think all the
we should ban
all
Sarko.
the like discard spell on a creature, those three all are pretty okay, at least in like win-lossing most of the main builds, but they don't win-loss all of them, and that is certainly a little bit concerning. But I think those are probably the ones that are the most playable, but hard to say for sure.
Mesmeric Fiend in particular is notable because it does win-win the Pox variants. Because if they play Pox on turn 1, then you discard Mesmeric Fiend and win with Mutavault. And if they don't, then you play Mesmeric Fiend and take away the Pox.
Yep. Yeah, I guess that is a pretty notable one. And again, in case anyone isn't entirely up
Yeah.
to date on it, I believe Brain Maggot is getting pair banned with that one, or pair voted
Yes.
on. So unfortunately, you won't be able to just swap to that one if you want to keep playing that effect.
What I was gonna say is that Sarcomancy definitely should get banned. Also, if it's legal next month, it's absolutely terrible because it basically loses to every hatchery deck, other than like double hatchery, I guess. But and yeah, like go first, win the game. Like even if it's not particularly good next month, you always have to consider it if it's legal. So those getting banned will actually make some changes to the
For
format.
Yeah.
I actually think Kitesail Freebooter, amusingly, this might be the month for it to take the place of Mesmeric Fiend because it actually does hit most of the things when your creature is actually on the land. So you didn't care to hit the creature anyways. But I still don't think that card's very good. But it is amusingly a solid replacement, specifically against hatchery decks. It probably does win-win hatchery Zurin Orb. Kitesail Freebooter is a 2/1 flyer
1/2.
that is Mesmeric Fiend, or 1/2
1/2.
flyer that it's basically Mesmeric Fiend, but it can't hit creatures, which is probably the such an important downside that it makes it almost unplayable most of the time, but is pretty nice against specifically Emity and Hatchery where you weren't hitting it anyways when it doesn't hit non-lands. So
I mean, yeah, it does not seem playable whatsoever, but the card will exist.
Yeah.
all right. Well, it looks like I feel like we've wrapped up most of our thoughts on Hatchery and Edge of Eternities and how they might impact our upcoming meta. So hopefully everyone has a good time submitting to the chaotic main event this upcoming month.
Yep. And as a reminder, submissions open on August 1st. There'll be the submission form on the website, 3cardblind.com, as well as links to it in the Discord and the YouTube channel. But yeah, so if that's everything, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to everyone at home for listening. And I think that's it for this episode. So we'll see you next time.